Hello and welcome to the 63rd episode of the Hope Illuminated podcast, your source for stories, science, and strategy of resilience, mental health promotion, and suicide prevention, where we live, learn, and work. I'm your host, Dr. Sally Spencer-Thomas, and I'm on a life mission to empower communities with solutions that help people overcome isolation and despair and rekindle a passion for living. Each episode, we're joined by international experts who inspire hope and offer real guidance. Welcome to the show. I'm so glad you've joined us. Today, we have a very important conversation, a conversation with multiple levels about men's mental health, about our athletes' mental health, and about Black men, social injustice, and the well-being of our communities. We're recording at a time of very difficult social unrest. The mass incarceration and police brutality against our Black men in particular have captivated our nation's attention, and many of us are leaning in like never before. We're acknowledging the multiple systems of oppression, not only in our justice system, but in our health system, our education system, and the many ways that these systems of oppression have led to marginalization of people, trauma, and disparity. Today, I have a very esteemed guest. Dwight Hollier played as a linebacker for 8 years for Miami Dolphins and 1 year for the Indiana Colts. Then he served as a VP for Wellness and Clinical Services for the NFL, where he worked on player engagement and total wellness of the athletes. Today, he's a senior associate athletic director at the University of North Carolina, where he oversees student athlete health and well-being. Dwight and I met many years ago through our mutual connection with the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, as he was helping with a similar support line for the NFL players. And he graciously came out to Colorado, again, many years ago, to present at our US-Canada Forum on mental health and the workplace. More recently, we reconnected, and he, again, graciously agreed to write the foreword for our upcoming book, Guts, Grit, and the Grind, a mental health manual for men. Dwight, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sally Thomas.
Yeah, it's really great to have you here. And I know this is it's a very difficult time, and there's a lot of things going on right now, professionally and personally for you. So I'm very grateful that you created this space to have this really important conversation about mental health and men, and particularly in the Black community. Tell us a little bit about your story, which I find so powerful. How did you get into this space where you are advocating for the well-being of men and your athletes?
Well, first of all, thank you for opening up the discussion and creating a space where we can have these conversations. It's really important to talk about, and to be quite honest, there's just not enough frank conversations about the challenges that people face on all levels. But when we talk about mental health, and we talk about men's mental health and Black men in particular, it's an important area to cover. And so, again, thank you for being willing to have that conversation. As far as my story, I grew up in Hampton, Virginia, in a home where we struggle sometimes, and sometimes the lights on and sometimes they're not. And but no matter what we had or didn't have, we always had our door open to others, and it's that sense of community, that sense of taking care of one another that stuck with me, and is, I think, and I attribute to the reason I'm in this mental health space and trying to work to help support others. I was fortunate that I could play football, because I otherwise wouldn't have had many opportunities to do much more. I'm a first generation college student, and that opportunity was afforded because of my ability to play football. So I'm grateful to the sport of football for providing me that opportunity to get an education that my parents, and that my siblings, didn't before me didn't have a chance to get. Uh, Went to the University of North Carolina, fell in love with the place immediately, and I grew up this really reserved kid, kind of a little shy, didn't talk very much, and so in my mind, I wanted to be I was thinking I could do something around sports and be a broadcaster. I was a tinkler as a youth, and thought maybe engineering, something like that, but and realized I didn't enjoy math enough to go into that field. Um, but I went into North Carolina and thought, maybe I could do sports broadcasting. So I initially started out as a speech communications major. Now, as a speech communications major, you have to give talks and speeches and act in plays and work with others to create these presentations, and so I was in that mode doing those things, and I was a mess. I was a real mess. Like I would go into those talks and those speeches and come out and I'm drenched in sweat like I had just played a game. I was so anxious. I developed a facial tic. So when I was in front of people, I could feel my cheek jumping. Nobody could see it, but it drove me mad. And so I had all this anxiety around this, and I'm like, man, this degree is going to wear me out, more so than playing sports. And so I got to a point where I said, look, I gotta do something else. But I was so far along in my speech communications requirements that I was like, well, then I'll double major. And that second major was psychology, and I'd taken a class and fell in love with it, and so ended up double majoring in speech communications and psychology. Fast forward, got an opportunity to play in the NFL, and about my fifth year into playing in the NFL, we had a coaching change, and and suddenly I was one of the old dudes on the team. I was like 27, 28.
Right.
I was the old dude. They were calling me old man and Mr. Professional. And I was like, if they're calling me old man, I might want to start looking for another career, another opportunity somewhere. So it was at that moment where I was like, okay, I got to figure out what I'm going to do next. And I decided to attend Nova Southeastern University for a master's degree in counseling. I went over, took a class as an elective one summer semester, and decided to jump in. And so ended up playing in the NFL and working on my master's degree at the same time, played one more season in Indianapolis, and then I was out of the game and jumped into the counseling world right away. I mean, it was 2 months after officially filing for severance that I was working as a intensive outpatient therapist for dual diagnosed adjudicated youth. So jumped into the fire right away. And I'm going to fast forward a little bit. Spent 12 years working as a counselor in many different realms. As a school-based therapist, I mentioned the intensive outpatient therapist. I was a child and adolescent outpatient therapist. I was a foster care program manager where I worked with 40 plus foster homes and foster parents, providing training, placing kids into those homes. I did some um, there's a lot of stuff that's blurring together. I mentioned school-based. I did school-based where I also coached a little bit, but I also was in private practice for 6 years. So there was a lot that I crammed into that 12 years of experience, and then I got an opportunity to work at the NFL, as you mentioned. So it's a long story, I think I've probably overshared.
I just want to back up a little bit to the early days, because um, the psychology of sport, if you will, is actually a really important part of this conversation. That having a team, striving towards something that's important together, depending on one another, all of those things, a community really can help youth in so many ways find themselves, find the value of collaboration, have a way to release stress that's happening in other parts of their life. Talk a little bit about what it meant to be part of a team in terms of your own mental health.
It was profound. It is one of those elements that I am forever grateful for. It taught me so much about life, about perseverance, about even leaning on someone else, and also responsibility to others, making sure that you are where you're supposed to be, and that camaraderie that you develop amongst your peers, and knowing that there's somebody beside you that's working on the same thing that you're working on, that you can trust to do their part to help support the overall mission, is an amazing thing, and it's something that in my professional life I've tried to recreate, that environment, because it is nurturing, from a mental health standpoint. If you you can relax in some sense, more so when you know that somebody has your back,
Mm-hmm.
when you know that there are people that you can count on, when you feel confident in the leadership that's showing you the way and directing you, and they have a hand on your shoulder, and are guiding you along the way. I mean, there's a real peace of mind that you get, that I got in being a football player and
Mm-hmm.
being a part of that team. And I talked about being a shy person, not talking much. I was fortunate. I had a little fearlessness in me, because that gave me the confidence when I put on the helmet, and I didn't have to talk. I could just show. It allowed me that opportunity to come out of my shell and be this person that I needed to be in this moment. I sing the praises of athletics and what it's done for my life and what it's done for people that I've seen. I'm grateful for the chance to continue to work in athletics, to be supportive to others as they go through this challenging space, because I know what it does in building a foundation that people can really lean on later in life. And when used the right way, and it it is a space where you have a community, and
Right.
that community helps to take care of you. It has a lot of really positive tentacles to it.
And when it comes to men's mental health, we notice sometimes that when boys are young, we're fostering that sense of camaraderie, pull together, lean on one another, whether it's sports or scouting or clubs at school or whatever. But at some point, after you get out of school, we push that aside. And, there's a lot of effort for men to be these lone wolves, to not need anybody and so forth. And so to have that history of how important teamwork was and how important it was to have somebody have your back, It's good to touchstone back to that sometimes later in life when we start to lose that. I think the other thing that I've noticed that sport does is it's about perseverance. It's about discipline. It gets really hard sometimes and you're stuck in the middle of it going, why the hell am I doing this? This is so hard. I'm in so much pain. But if you keep going, there's something good that's going to happen on the other side. Again, I think that's just a powerful metaphor for life. And you don't always get the trophy. You don't always get to win, and it's still good, right?
That's right.
Yeah. All kinds of lessons there. And then the other piece that, you've shared with me in earlier conversations that I really would like you to touch upon, because I also think this is a common phenomenon for many people, but especially for men who have come to a position of high achieving, and for many, like thinking about performing in the NFL is like unbelievable dream come true, right? When you get to that place, you can really start to form this single source identity that I am an NFL player. And what does that mean? I mean, that could also be like, I am a doctor, or I am top of my sales team, or whatever it is that you've been striving for so hard. You run the risk of developing this single source identity. And you've shared me with your story about, you did all the right things to transition out, and it was still incredibly hard. Can you just kind of back up to that point in time and talk a little bit about what it meant to have that kind of identity, how you tried to fortify yourself against it, and how it was still hard when you were transitioning?
Sure. And you hit the nail on the head when I've said this 100 times, when you've been the best of the best at what you do, and suddenly somebody tells you can't do that anymore, you're going to be impacted in some way. And so I talk about transitioning into my career as a mental health professional right away out of football. And having gone through and gotten a master's degree, I had put pieces in place for a smooth transition. I was a poster child for smooth transition out of athletics. I went back to school, got a master's degree. I didn't make a lot of money from an NFL standpoint, but I didn't spend a tremendous amount either. I married up. My beautiful wife is a physician. Like I did a lot of great things to put myself in position for success. And rolling into a job 2 months after filing for severance would seem to be a smooth transition, but it really wasn't. I struggled with what you talked about, which is, if I'm not a football player, who am I? I've been that. I've done that. I'm trying to be this counselor, but I'm a football player, or I've identified as a football player because that's where I spent the majority of my years. Since I was 7 years old, I played football, and now I'm 32 and trying to figure out what I'm doing and what am I doing next. And I was in this challenging space where I was spiraling emotionally. I felt stuck. I missed the game. I couldn't watch football for 2 years. Sundays were grass cutting time. I had the freshest lawn in the neighborhood. Because Sundays I couldn't, and it was extremely frustrating for my wife, who's a football fan. Her dad was a college football player and a coach and ref, but I couldn't do it, and I ultimately got to a place where it was dark, and I wanted to end it for myself. And fortunately for me, I had teammates who, noticed that I wasn't who I had been, or that I wasn't the person that they had recognized, and they reached out, and ultimately ended up in getting some support and some help to navigate through that challenge. I mean, I had this idea that I was a failure because I only played 9 years in the NFL. And when I hear myself say it out loud, I want to smack myself. And sometimes I do when I'm in private. But, you only played 9 years in the man, shut up. You played 9 years in the NFL. But I was so frustrated that I didn't play 10. And I felt like I left something on the table. And um, it was one of those pieces that I had a hard time getting over. You know, people would see me and they were like, "Oh wow, you must play in the NFL." And I'm like, "You know, I'm almost 40. Uh, no, I don't. But thanks." And that thanks was an empty thanks because I was really angry and frustrated about not being an NFL player, and I struggled with that for a couple of years. And again, fortunately, got some help and support and pointed in the right direction. And what I did following that was channel that challenge that I had to um, pursue a career path that would allow me to help others.
Dwight, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing the vulnerable parts of your story with us as well. You know, um, storytelling is a big part of the work, and it takes a lot of courage to step into that space to share, especially when you have a career where you're really revered for your strength and your performance and all of that. It's hard. It's hard for everybody to do. It's especially hard for men to do, and it's especially hard for Black men. And thank you for being a model for that. Can you
Well,
talk?
thank you. No,
Yeah.
nobody's going to hear this, so it's okay. Nobody's going to see this. I'm okay.
Could you talk just a little bit about just your impressions of the mental health and suicide prevention movement within the Black men community? We're at the suicide prevention community. We are very much acknowledging that suicide's so white, as some of us say. It's mostly white women, actually, and mostly because we've lost, like myself, a loved one, and it's easier for us to step in the arena and try to get some work done. It's harder for some other communities, and we're really trying to be mindful of that and trying to do what we can to change that. And so I would really love to hear your perceptions on how we can enroll Black men in particular into this conversation to make it better and broader and more impactful.
Well, I will say that today it is a much more broader, motivated community of Black men and women and supporters of the African American mental health community that are doing work today to help support suicide prevention in Black communities, and it's much more robust than it was, you know, even 10 years ago. It's a stronger place, and there are some strong clinical and non-clinical support folks working in the suicide prevention space that are focused on the Black community. And again, we've come a long way, but there's still a ways to go. And that is part of the catch-up game that that we've had to engage in the African American community. And sometimes we make these big over generalizations of the Black community and around mental health, and realize that it is different in every community. But there are some things that are similar in the stories of the men and women that I talked to about how mental health was treated for them as they were growing up and how it was treated for me. We just didn't talk about it. And I know that is the case in some African American communities, not every, but in some. And one of the things that I see about mental health in general, but in the Black community in particular right now, is more of a willingness to have those conversations, more of a willingness to talk about mental health. In fact, just earlier today, I was asked to speak at a men's retreat about mental health that's going on this weekend. And so there's a greater willingness to explore that, to move beyond the Superman complex of that men have, that I can handle anything and I can take on anything, and no, I don't have any mental health. And I think we do have to continue the conversation. We do have to continue to engage. But I love the energy of some of the young mental health professionals that I know of who are engaged in this work, in particular around suicide prevention for Black men, and it's really a powerful movement, but needs to continue to beat that drum and get the word out that it's an area that we got to pay attention to. And when you think about how challenging things are right now in this space and time, in the United States in particular, the joblessness, right, the challenges of isolation around everyone self-isolating and quarantining, and what that does to you emotionally, and you add on top of that the tragedies around Mr. Floyd, Mr. Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and what that does to a person emotionally. And you and I talked about this. I'm struggling. I'm in this moment, I'm struggling. And I know all the resources, I know all the right things to say, and what I can do and how to meditate. And for me, I'm still struggling. So what happens to the person without that toolkit, who is looking for something to help them manage all that they're feeling, all that they're taking in? It's a challenging time, and it's especially challenging for Black men, in my opinion.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a very, very heavy time, and it's a confusing time. It's an overwhelming time. And I don't know that we have the answers about how we're going to get through this. We're just going to try to figure it out. And what I find helpful is this, just having conversations about our realities in it, and acknowledging that we are struggling and we are suffering, but doing it together.
Absolutely.
That's all I got. So when you look at the younger generation and the fact that they're getting a lot of this right, maybe it's because they're just fed up. Maybe it's because they've just gotten permission to be a different way. What are you seeing that we can learn from them, to help the generations that went before that maybe didn't have those permissions, or were actually scorned, or, seen as the other if they talked about their mental health or their suffering? What can we learn from this younger generation that seems to be a little bit more outspoken and bold?
Yeah, I think that it's okay. It's okay to boldly speak out. We were taught to be quiet. You don't talk about that. You don't air your your dirty laundry, right? You stay quiet about that, or you suck it up and you push through. But I think we're learning that it's okay to talk about the challenges that you struggled with, and also by acknowledging the challenges that you struggle with, you notice that people gravitate to you because in some ways they've struggled too, and may have come from a background like mine or history like mine, where you were taught to not talk about it. But when you talk about it, you realize that there are other people around you that are facing similar challenges, and it gives you a chance to come together and work through those challenges. So I think their ability to speak up and vocalize the challenges that they're going through, and share those stories is amazing. And that peer-to-peer process of connecting has always worked, but it's working on it differently. You know, it's always worked in other spaces, and it works in the emotional wellness space as well. And I think that's a powerful tool that we have. And you know, one of the young people that I see out doing the work and talking about his own experience is a young man named Rashawn Miller. He's based out of Charlotte, North Carolina, and he's a powerful voice, and I'm really proud of the work that he's done. He's he's an author. He's a licensed clinician. He's a former athlete. I mean, he's a strong voice in the community, and I definitely want to give him props for the work that he's doing and the connections that he's making, not just in the North Carolina community, but nationally.
Yes. Powerful storytellers move things really, really well. And so thank you for celebrating him and the work that he's doing to bring people along into this experience, and also, you know, what's possible to get through it. I think the other way that, you know, the mental health community, the suicide prevention community, that we have failed, Black people in particular, is that mostly historically our narrative around suicide prevention has been, you know, it's 90% connected to a mental health condition, and therefore, you know, the best course of action is to get these troubled people to the counselors, and we have totally sidestepped and missed the social justice issues that create tremendous despair in communities. You know, we can send people to counselors all day, but if we don't address the systemic racism that exists, that leads people into lives that are despairing, not from any fault of their own, but because of lack of access to the things that can help people live fully engaged lives, that's no fault of theirs. And all the counseling in the world is not going to fix that. So I think that's also another place that we're really taking a look at. What are the social determinants of suicide, and why are they not getting equal attention in our conversation around suicide prevention? So I think that's also really highlighted right now in this moment, you know.
Absolutely. Really important point that you make there. And the ground has never been level. It's never been level between the Black community and access to services, resources, and what others have had access to. And so it takes a little more work, a little harder work, and maybe working at a different angle. And I think that, you know, we've mastered working at different angles, and we're going to continue to do that to make sure that even in the space of suicide and suicide prevention, that we are included in the conversation, and that we get the messaging. And it may be delivered in a different way, but it's an important message that we have to get as well.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit now about the work that you're doing to help student athletes in particular, you know, build that total wellness, build those pillars that can help them not only in the performance while they're playing their sport, but for the rest of their lives. What have you learned through, you know, now a couple decades of supporting student athletes' well-being?
Well, I think back to my time as a student athlete and challenges I had, particularly as a first generation poor college student, and trying to manage the the psycho emotional items of being a Black kid on a majority white campus, and then academically managing the those challenges, and then, oh, by the way, you got this 6 o'clock run, and then you're going to go to class after that. So there was a lot to manage, and so I think about the challenges that student athletes have, and some of the stressors that they have in their life, and you think about time demands, academics, potential for injuries, the family relationships, and being away from home, and maybe some things that are going on, and sleep disturbance, cultural dynamics of being in a group with people from varied backgrounds. There's a lot that goes into that struggle, and been fortunate. And you mentioned total wellness, and total wellness was an initiative that is an initiative that the NFL uses. And one of the things that we talked about in total wellness was really looking hard at those four pillars. And for the NFL, it was, those four pillars were the financial strength, which we talk about that because of the kind of money that you see in such a short time in the NFL. So you got financial strength. You got the thing that people always recognize when they see the athlete, and that's physical strength. It's that presence, and it's what we as athletes assumed was our only strength, right? If we didn't have physical strength, we didn't have anything. But we realized that we're more dynamic than just a physical being. Then you talk about personal strength. And personal strength are those relationships. It's that family dynamic. It's the relationships you have with your peers and others, and how that helps you navigate the world. But the one that always gets overlooked is emotional strength. And and what we argue, and you could add a fifth one there, which is spiritual strength. But we argue that if one of those pillars are out of line, then how can you be the best that you can be? How can you be the best father, the best son, best husband? And we say that you can't. But for those others, there are things that you would absolutely do to address those issues. If your money was funny, you go and talk to somebody. If your ankle was sprained or whatever, you talk to an athletic trainer. Family discussions always happen around that personal strength. But mental health, emotional health, has always been the one that gets overlooked. And so total wellness was really focused on making sure that we're addressing all of those elements and growing all of those elements. And I continue to have those same conversations at the collegiate level by making sure that we have resources in all of the areas that student athletes need support in. Because they're more than just the athlete. It's bigger than just the game. It's bigger than just being a student. You are a student athlete, and how do we support you and all that who you are within that student athlete element? It's been, I feel very fortunate to be able to do that, and not only to be able to do that, but to do it at a place that I've loved since I was 18. Mm-hmm. I feel very fortunate to have that opportunity to serve student athletes, or to be a cog, because there are some really dynamic people on our campus who are doing the day-to-day work with our student athletes, from Dr. Cricket Lane, who leads our leadership development, to Dr. Jenny Shannon and Dr. Brendan Carr, who are our sports psychologists that work with our student athletes every day. They're the ones on the ground that are really connecting and supporting our student athletes. You know, Corey Sawyer and others who are there on the ground, again, just doing the day-to-day work. In Shelly Johnson, again, just I'm a fortunate guy to be able to be in the role that I'm in, and I hadn't even started with our great strength and conditioning coaches and all our sports medicine people, our nutritionist, you know, it's Kelsey and Rachel. I mean, there's so many people I could go through and talk about that do a tremendous job of providing the support and resources that we need to help grow our student athletes into the strong, dynamic adults that they become. So I'm fortunate. I feel very fortunate and very blessed.
And that kind of just brings us back around to how we get through this. You know, finding ways to serve, finding ways to make meaning, and finding your team. No matter what you're in, that's a pretty good recipe for getting through hard times. And so there you are, back at your alma mater, doing the thing you love to do with a great team around you. And that's as best as it's going to get, and finding the gratitude in the moments when it's heavy and hard. I also really love your model of positioning all of these things as strengths. I also think this is a really important message direction, especially for men who pride themselves so much as a core part of who they are, for being strong. So you're not talking about mental illness, even though it might be there. You're talking about emotional strength, how to build that pillar of strength, because it's going to serve your other pillars. So you can be the best student athlete, the best man, whoever your audience is, that you can possibly be. I think that that's a message that has a better chance of success with some of, especially our young men who can't see themselves at 50 or 70 at all, but they can see themselves playing in the next game.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I think that's a really important part of the message.
I agree.
This has been an honor, Dwight. Thank you so much to have this conversation with me today. I have been very touched by it, and I'm guessing many of our listeners have as well. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. My Twitter handle is dhall50, DHOL50. You know, it references my number when I was a Dolphin. I got a jersey back here, number 50. And then on Instagram, it's my name, Dwight Hollier, at Instagram. You know, would love to chat and connect with anyone, and appreciate the conversation, appreciate the opportunity to be here. Dr. Spencer Thomas, you are amazing, and the work that you do and is very special, and you're a special person in doing it. And again, really appreciate you.
Thank you. I'm just going to go back real quickly and just highlight a couple of the themes that we had in this conversation, and then just come back to you for some final thoughts, and then we'll wrap up. We opened the conversation acknowledging this moment in history that we are at right now, where racial injustice is on the top of many people's minds, and people are paying attention in ways that we haven't really before, or many parts of our community haven't done the due diligence around. And we wove that into conversations around men and mental health, and the Black community and mental health, and just acknowledging that these are difficult conversations to have at a very heavy time. We talked about what could work and what's working. And one of the things that's working is sport. Sport provides a lot of pathways for people who may be feeling isolated or disconnected or undervalued, maybe having difficult times managing stress or discrimination. They can find family, they can find unity, and they can strive and persevere through difficult things together to achieve really important outcomes that are lessons learned for the rest of their life. We talked about a little bit about, the diversity within the Black community, but some commonalities of historically mental health has not been addressed proactively, but the up and coming generation seems to have fewer barriers around that, and that we can learn so much from them of how they're stepping boldly and changing the narrative. And again, especially in this time where we are isolated, we are frightened about the uncertainty of our future, we are facing all kinds of violence and unrest and murders. We need those bold young leaders to shape a narrative of pulling together and resilience and sharing their stories of how they're coming through this and advocating for the right thing to do. We acknowledge that the ground has never been level, that systemic racism exists throughout every single system we have in the world, but especially in the United States. Our longstanding history of this is really bubbling to the surface right now in ways that are unprecedented. And we need conversations, and we need tools to get through this. And one of the tools that you have so much dedicated your life to building is helping people, student athletes in particular, build pillars of strength in major areas of their life that will carry them through not just their performance while they're doing their sport in college, but things that they'll learn and lean on for the rest of their life. And so for you, that's how you have made meaning out of a difficult transition into how you're serving and how you're living your life for the rest of your life. And we're very grateful on so many levels, Dwight, that you're doing that. What are the final takeaways or points that you want to make about this conversation?
I think you summed it up beautifully. I don't know that I can add much more to it. One point that I, wanted to touch on was just the continuum that we're all on as it relates to mental health. Mental health is on a continuum from mental illness, which is often referred to as mental health, to mental wellness, that often gets left out when we talk about mental health. And so I think understanding that at every moment in time, we're on that mental health continuum. And some of us are on one end, and some of us are on another end, and sometimes we move up and down that continuum from minute to minute. And so when we understand that, we can become more accepting of mental health and what mental health really means. It means that it's we can move again from being mentally well and the strong end of wellness to being mentally ill and struggling with some of the challenges of mental illness.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And it also just ties into the prejudice and discrimination that we have in other areas of our world, that as soon as we start doing the othering thing, like those people over there, that's when we're in trouble. And so to acknowledge, if you haven't had a moment yet of deep despair, it's coming. It's coming. And be quick, be slow to judge, and be quick to take a point of view from someone else's perspective, because when you get to that point of your own despair, you'll understand. Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good point and a great way to close this. Thanks again, Dwight. Thanks for all of the listeners who leaned in today to join us, and this and other very important conversations that are happening right now on these very difficult topics. Thank you to our sound editor, Dave, for making us sound awesome, and for Jessica, who keeps everything organized for me. I really appreciate you, Jessica. And and everybody who is just really intentionally trying to do better right now in this moment in history. I hope you got something out of this. Please, if you did, leave a rating and review. It helps other people find us on Apple Podcasts and in other places. And it also helps me understand what you want more of, what you want different. And so we can make this serve a broader community. If you want to hear what's coming down the pike, please go to my website, sallyspencerthomas.com, sign up for the newsletter, and you'll hear about upcoming podcasts, webinars, Twitter chats, etc. I'd love to hear from you. With that said, let's just pause for a moment and close with our little saying, open your heart, challenge your thinking, and take action to save lives. Together, we can restore dignity and sustain a passion for living.